Madame Lefebvre was a woman who lived in the countryside. She was a widow, which means her husband had died. She was a bit like a farmer, wearing ribbons and fancy hats. She liked to act very important when she was around other people, even though she wasn't really that special. It was like how some people hide their rough hands in nice gloves. Madame Lefebvre had a servant named Rose. Rose was a good and simple woman who also lived in the countryside. These two women lived in a small house with green windows by the side of a main road in Normandy, which is in the middle of the Cox region. They had a small garden in front of the house where they grew vegetables. One night, someone stole 12 onions from their garden. When Rose noticed that the onions were gone, she quickly went to tell Madame Lefebvre, who came downstairs in her warm wool skirt. Madame Lefebvre was very upset. She had been robbed. If there were thieves in the area, they might come back. The two scared women looked at the footprints in the garden, talking and guessing about what happened. Look, they went that way. They climbed over the wall and jumped into the garden. They started to worry about what might happen next. How could they sleep calmly now? The news about the stolen onions spread. The neighbors came by, looked around, and talked about what had happened. The two women told each neighbor what they had seen and what they thought. A farmer who lived nearby said to them, "You should get a dog." That was true. They should get a dog, even if it was just to make noise when someone came. But not a big dog. What would they do with a big dog? It would eat too much food. But a small dog, a little puppy that would bark, would be perfect. After everyone had left, Madame Lefebvre thought about getting a dog. But she was very worried about how much food a dog would need because she didn't like to spend much money. Madame Lefebvre was the kind of woman who always carried small coins to give to beggars or to put in the church collection plate on Sundays. Rose, who loved animals, shared her thoughts and strongly supported the idea of getting a dog. So, they decided to get a dog, but it had to be a very small one. They started looking for a dog, but they only found big ones that would eat a lot of soup. The grocer in Rallville had a tiny dog, but he asked for 2 francs to cover the cost of sending it. Madame Lefebvre said she would take care of a little dog, but she would not pay for one. The baker, who knew what had happened with the stolen onions, brought a strange little yellow animal in his cart one morning. The animal had almost no paws, the body of a crocodile, the head of a fox, and a curly tail that stood up like a feather. The dog looked very funny, but Madame Lefebvre thought it was quite cute, especially since it didn't cost anything. Rose hugged the little dog and asked the baker what its name was. Pierrot, the baker said. They put Pierrot in an old soap box and gave him some water, which he drank. Then they gave him a piece of bread, and he ate it. Madame Lefebvre felt a bit worried and had an idea. When he gets used to the house, we can let him run outside. He can find food by himself in the countryside. So, they let Pierrot run around outside, but he was still very hungry. Pierrot didn't bark at all, except when he was asking for food, and then he barked very loudly. Anyone could come into the garden, and Pierrot would run up to them and be friendly, but he wouldn't bark. Even so, Madame Lefebvre got used to the little dog. She even started to like him and sometimes gave him pieces of bread dipped in the gravy from her plate. But she never thought about the tax that had to be paid for owning a dog. When someone came to collect 8 francs, madame, for this little puppy who didn't even bark, Madame Lefebvre almost fainted from the shock. Right away, they decided that they had to get rid of Pierrot. But no one wanted to take him. Everyone around them refused to take Pierrot, no matter how far they asked. Finally, not knowing what else to do, they decided to make him piqueur du mas. Piqueur du mas means to make the dog eat chalk. When someone wants to get rid of a dog, they make him piqueur du mas. In the middle of a large field, there is a small hut, or rather, just a tiny roof on the ground. This is the entrance to a deep clay pit. A big, deep hole goes down 20 meters underground and leads to a long series of tunnels. Once a year, people go down into the pit when they need to get clay to put on the fields. The rest of the year, this place is used as a graveyard for dogs that people want to get rid of. As you walk by this hole, you can hear sad howls, angry barks, and pitiful cries coming from the dogs below. Hunting dogs and sheepdogs are very scared of this place, and when you lean over the hole, you can smell a terrible, rotten odor. Awful things happen in the darkness of this pit. When a dog has been left down there for 10 or 12 days, living off the rotting remains of the dogs that came before him, a bigger, stronger dog is thrown into the pit. Then, the two dogs are left alone, hungry, with their eyes shining in the dark. They watch each other, follow each other, and hesitate. But hunger drives them to fight, and after a desperate struggle, the stronger dog eats the weaker one. When they decided to make Pierrot piqueur du mas, they needed someone to take the dog to the chalk pit. The man who fixed the road wanted 6 sous to do it. Madame Lefebvre thought that was too expensive. The neighbor's hired boy asked for 5 sous, but that was still too much. So, Rose suggested that they take Pierrot themselves. This way, the dog wouldn't be treated badly on the way, and he wouldn't suspect what was going to happen. They decided to go together at twilight. That evening, they gave Pierrot a nice bowl of soup with a little butter in it. He ate it all up happily, wagging his tail. Then Rose gently picked him up and put him in her apron. They walked quickly across the field, like thieves. Soon, they saw the chalk pit and walked up to it. Madame Lefebvre leaned over to see if she could hear any animals crying. No, there were none. Pierrot would be alone. Rose, who was crying, kissed the dog and then threw him into the chalk pit. Both of them leaned over, listening. First, they heard a dull thud, then a sharp, sad cry of pain from Pierrot. Then came more quiet, sad cries, followed by desperate yelps from the dog, who was looking up toward the opening of the pit. He yelped. Oh, how he yelped! Madame Lefebvre and Rose were filled with regret, fear, and a strange, wild terror, so they ran away from the spot. Rose ran faster, and Madame Lefebvre cried, "Wait for me, Rose, wait for me." That night, they were both haunted by terrible nightmares. Madame Lefebvre dreamed she was sitting at the table to eat her soup, but when she uncovered the soup pot, Pierrot was inside. He jumped out and bit her nose. She woke up and thought she could still hear him yelping. She listened, but it was only in her imagination. She fell asleep again and dreamed she was walking down a long road that never seemed to end. Suddenly, she saw a basket lying in the middle of the road, a large farmer's basket. The basket frightened her. She finally opened it, and Pierrot, hiding inside, grabbed her hand and wouldn't let go. She ran away in terror with the dog hanging onto her arm, biting it. At daybreak, Madame Lefebvre got up, almost out of her mind, and ran to the chalk pit. Pierrot was still yelping. He had yelped all night. She began to cry and called him by all sorts of sweet names. He answered her with all the loving sounds of his little dog voice. She wanted to see him again, promising herself that she would take care of him until he died. She ran to the man who worked at the chalk pit and told him what had happened. The man listened but said nothing. When she finished, he said, "You want your dog back? That will cost 4 francs. Madame Lefebvre jumped in surprise. All her sadness disappeared in a moment. 4 francs, she said. You're joking. 4 francs. Do you think I'm going to bring my ropes, my tools, and go down there with my boy just to get bitten by your bad dog and give him back to you? You shouldn't have thrown him down there." Madame Lefebvre walked away, angry. 4 francs. When she got home, she called Rose and told her what the man at the chalk pit had said. Rose, always patient, repeated, 4 francs. That's a lot of money, madam. Then she added, maybe we can throw some food down to him, the poor dog, so he won't starve. Madame Lefebvre agreed and felt happy about the idea. So, they went back to the chalk pit with a big piece of bread and butter. They cut the bread into small pieces and threw them down one by one, talking to Pierrot each time. As soon as Pierrot finished one piece, he yelped for more. They came back that evening, the next day, and every day after that. But they only made one trip each day. One morning, as they were about to drop the first piece of bread, they suddenly heard loud barking from the pit. There were 2 dogs down there now. Someone had thrown in a big dog. Pierrot, cried Rose. And Pierrot yelped and yelped. They started throwing down food, but each time they did, they could hear a terrible fight. Then they heard Pierrot's sad cries because the big dog had bitten him and eaten all the food, since he was stronger. Even though they tried to help by saying, "This is for you, Pierrot," Pierrot didn't seem to get any of the food. The 2 women, shocked, looked at each other, and Madame Lefebvre said in a bitter tone, "I can't feed all the dogs they throw in there. We have to stop." Feeling upset at the idea of feeding many dogs with her money, she left, even taking back the leftover bread, which she ate as she walked home. Rose followed her, wiping her eyes on the corner of her blue apron.